Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm going to share my screen and we will begin. Now, before we dive into the book of Esther, chapter 1, last time we spoke about how the book of Esther was a little bit more controversial than some of the other books in Tanakh, specifically for religious reasons, maybe for some other reasons. And one of the reasons being that in the entire book, no mention is made to tefillah, to God, to any of the mitzvos or any things like that. And this past week, I found a quote which I thought was very interesting, and I wanted to bring that up and read it to you before we began the book itself. It comes from a translation of Josephus, which was done in the 1800s by William Whiston. It's the older translation, not the most recent, up-to-date translation. But William Whiston was a Christian, and obviously a very religious person, and he compares the parts of Josephus and as they relate to the parts of the Torah, parts of the Tanakh that we currently have. And in the chapter of Josephus, which talks about the Esther story, which is book 11, chapter 6, there's a footnote at the end written by William Whiston, and I thought it was very interesting. And if anybody has any comments, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. But this is what he writes. He writes, as to this whole book of Esther in the present Hebrew copy, it is so very imperfect. In a case where the providence of God was so very remarkable, and the Septuagint and Josephus have so much of religion, that it has not so much as the name of God once in it. No religious Jew could well be the authors of it, whose education obliged them to have a constant regard to God. And that's the William Whiston footnote. And to me, that's remarkable, because what he's saying essentially is that given the fact that we don't see the name of God mentioned once in the entire book of Esther, it couldn't possibly be that it was written by a religious Jew. And, whether we agree with that statement or not, the statement itself to me is very salient, that a religious Jew, especially through the eyes of a Christian, is someone who's so thinking about God and constantly focusing on Torah and mitzvot and tefillah and all the other things, that if we find a book, even in Tanakh, that doesn't have a single reference to those things, it's not possible that a religious Jew could have written it. So I wanted to quote that, and with that, we will jump right into the book of Esther. Remarkable book, and right from the beginning, we see that this seems to be a story that doesn't talk about Jewish people. And in the beginning, the first 26 verses of the entire book, not a single Jew is mentioned. So let's jump right in. Vayhi b'mei Achashverosh. It was in the days of Achashverosh, Hamelech meHodi v'ad Kush, who reigned from Hodi to Kush, Sheva v'Eser mea Medina, 127 countries. It was in those days where the king was sitting on the crown, on the throne in Shushan Habira, B'shnas Shalosh L'malcho, in the third year of his reign. We'll come back to that number later. In the third year of the king's reign, Asa Mishteh L'kol Sarav Avadav. He made this big party for all of his officials, all of his servants. Chel Paras Madai, the army as well. Hapartimim B'sari Hamedinos L'fanav. All of the rulers, all of the officials, and he invited them to this massive party. Pasuk Dalid, B'har Osos Osher Kavod Machuso, Ves Yakar Teferes Gedulaso Yamim Rabim, Shmonim Uma'asyom. He had 180 days where he wanted to show them the Osher Kavod Machuso, the riches and the wealth and his glory of his kingship. And this was the purpose of the party, to show off and to display all the things that he had. But when those 180 days came to an end, he made another party, a smaller party, for the people who lived in Shushan Habira, either Shushan the capital or in Shushan the palace, one of the two, it can mean either one. He made another party, Shivas Yamim, a 7-day party, B'chatzar Ginas Bitan HaMelech, in the courtyard of the king. And here the Megillot goes on, and we spoke about the exaggerations and the themes, how this is not just a book of Tanakh, this is not just a religious story, this is a narrative, this is rich with detail and has incredible descriptions of all these things that they have there. Chur, karpas, utcheles, achuz b'chavleivutz. Now, some of these words we don't exactly know what they mean because they appear nowhere else in Tanakh. The word karpas doesn't appear anywhere else, but it's some kinds of linen and fabrics. And we know what cheles means. It's this blue royal garments. Achuz b'chavleivutz, va'argaman, aglile kesef, these couches of silver, amudei sheish, pillars of of pillar of beautiful materials, mitos zahav, beds of gold, v'ketzev al ritzbaz bahad v'shesh v'dar v'sochares, all of these gems, all of these materials, all these beautiful things that the king is now showing off to his entire kingdom, at least the people who live close by to him. V'hashkos b'kli zahav, they used to drink. They would drink the drinks in these golden vessels. The kelim mikelim shanim, all kinds of kelim, all kinds of cups. And the midrashim say that these kelim shonim, what this pasuk means is that no person took a second drink from the same cup. That every single drink was drunk from a different, uniquely designed cup. The yayin malchus rav, the kingly wine was abundant. Kiyat hamelach, according to the hand of the king. The big party. And lots going on over here. Vashestia kadas ein ones. The drinking was by the law. There was no one who was forced. No one was told to drink more than they wanted to or less than they wanted to. No one was restricted from anything. That's what the king decided. I'll call Rav Beiso lasos kirson ish v'ish. Every person could do whatever they wanted. And Gam Vashti Hamalka Asasa Mishte Nashim Beis Hamalchus Ashel Melech Achashverosh. Vashti the queen, she made a party as well in a side room for the women in the palace of King Achashverosh. So we have this very, very broad and descriptive account of this party that we have in Shushan in the beginning. And as I said, this is a narrative. This is beginning. It's almost like a fairy tale, that it's describing all these incredible things and the riches of the king, and the wine was flowing and the food was abundant, and he had all these incredible beds of gold. And it's a really very descriptive account that we have over here. And that's how the Megillah Esther starts. Again, we've not met a single Jew yet. Let's continue. Pasuk number 10. Bayom hashvi ketov lev hamelech bayayin. On the seventh day, when the king's heart was very happy from all the wine, he had reached a level where he was either drunk or getting there, or at least the wine was affecting him in some positive way. Amar, he says to his 7 servants, L'mehuman bizza charvona bigsa bavaksa zesar v'charkas. These servants that he had, shiva sesarisim, Hamesharsim Espnei HaMelech Achashverosh, his 7 attendants. What did he tell them? Lahavi is Vashti Hamalka. He wanted them to bring Vashti the queen, Lufnei HaMelech b'Cheser Malchus, in front of the king, in the crown of Malchus. And as I pointed out last week, Keser Malchus, the Midrashim say, Keser Malchus, and only in Keser Malchus, only wearing the crown. Laharos ha'amim hasarim esyafia, so that everybody present should see her beauty. Because she was a very beautiful woman. And now the crucial pasuk where everything is going to change. But Tima'ain Hamalka Vashti, Queen Vashti, refused Lavo b'dvar hamelech, to approach according to the word of the king, Asher b'yad hasarisim, which were sent through the king's servants. Vayiktzov hamelech ma'od, the king got very upset. The chamaso ba'arabo, and the anger was burning inside of him. He was this terrible anger that came up in his heart because his queen had refused him. And you have to think about the context. This is not just saying no to the king in a private manner. This is in a public party in front of all the citizens that have come to attend this party after 187 days. And the king has made this one request in front of everyone, that I'm going to show Vashti to all of you. Everyone knows that the queen is going to come, and the queen refuses to come. And this is a public disgrace in front of the entire kingdom. And this really hits Achashverosh's heart. So I want to pause here for a moment and to point out something that I think is quite interesting. There's a Gemara in Eruvin by a Tana, Rabbi Eli. Rabbi Eli is not mentioned very many times in the Gemara. He only comes up a handful of times in the Tosefta and once in the Mishnah. But he has a line which is one of the more famous lines in the Gemara, and I think it's relevant here. Amar Rabbi Eli, he says that there are 3 ways that a person's inner nature can be discerned. 3 ways you can tell the true essence of who a person really is. And the way he has it is quite formulaic. He has bikoso, bikiso, ubikaaso. With a person's kos, with their cup, with their kiss, with their wallet, ubikaaso, with their anger. So with their cup, you know what a person is like when you see them when they're drunk. With their wallet, you see what they're like with their money. And because you see what they're like when they get angry. When they're drunk, what they do with money, and what they do when they're angry. And what we have here at the party is, first of all, we began with the descriptions of the incredible wealth and the lavishness and all the beautiful gemstones that Achashverosh had. So clearly we have lots of kis, lots of wallet. We also had the descriptions of the wine, how everybody was allowed to drink as much royal wine as they wanted, and the king himself was now happy with wine. So now we have kos, and here the queen has just embarrassed the king in front of everyone else. And now we have the insertion of ka'as, of anger. So now Achashverosh is drunk around all of his money and is very, very angry. And the Megillah is going to tell us now in what's about to come up, how the king is going to react to this and what the king is going to do. Now, there's another thing I'd like to point out here, and that's a quote from the historian Herodotus, who is a very interesting person. He was born around the year 484 BCE. And incidentally, if he was born, we're not sure exactly the year he was born, but if he was born in the year 44 BCE, that would have been the third year of the reign of Xerxes, who began his reign in the year 486. And 486 would be year 1, then 485 would be year 2, and 484 would have been year number 3. And Xerxes is one of the kings of Persia who is most often associated with being Achashverosh. So it's possible that Herodotus was born. He definitely lived around the time the Purim story is set, but nevertheless, it could have been possible that he was born at the third year of Achashverosh's reign, which is exactly where the Megillah began. The first pasuk that we saw, a few pasukim in, that when the king was in his third year, but in the third pasuk, B'shnas shalosh lo malcho, in the third year of his reign, this story begins. So it's possible that that's the moment that Herodotus was born, but that's just an anecdotal side. So the quote I want to bring from him is a quote from his book, The Histories, where in an unrelated aside, he's talking about different characters and different people. He talks about this character, Mecistes, the son of Darius, who happened to have been around a certain Persian disaster that was happening at the time. And he got into a bit of a fight with an admiral. And this is what Herodotus has to say, that Mecistes, the son of Darius, reviled the admiral Artayantes very bitterly, telling him with much pride that such generalship as his proved him worse than a woman. Again, it proved him worse than a woman, and that no punishment was too severe for the harm he had done to the king's estate. Now here's the key line. Now it is the greatest of all taunts in Persia to be called worse than a woman. Herodotus continues, these many insults angered Artayantes so much that he drew his sword upon Mecistes to kill him. But Zenagirus, son of Praxillus, saw him run to Mecistes and caught him around the middle and lifted him and hurled him to the ground. So the point here I want to bring is that in ancient Persia, at least according to Herodotus, who lives at the same time, saying that to be considered worse than a woman, to be considered under a woman, was a very, very big insult. And I think we'll see this play out in the next psukim as we go through. So let's continue. Pasuk Yud Gimel. Vayomer hamelech lachachamim yodeh ha'itim. The king turns to the chachamim who knew the times. Kichein devar hamelech lifnei kol yodeh das v'din. That was the way of the king, to turn to everyone who knew the laws and the legal precedent in the country. V'hakara velav karshna shesar admasad tarshish meser meres marsinam muchad shiva sari pras, the 7 rulers of Pras, Madai, roe pnei hamelech, the ones who saw the face of the king. Hayoshvim Rishon of Amachos, the ones who were seated at the top of the kingship, and Kedas Ma La'asos b'Malka Vashti. They wanted to know what to do. Achashverosh wanted to know what to do with the queen Vashti. Alasher lo asasa es mamar hamelech Achashverosh biyad hasarisim. They did not that she did not listen to him through the sarisim. Now, I think it's noteworthy, and this I found fascinating, and I think you will as well. The question one may ask here is, why did Achashverosh seek the counsel of his advisors at the time when he was still drunk and angry? And I found another source, again from Herodotus, which absolutely blew my mind, and it's something I'd never heard of before, and I doubt anyone else has heard of this either. And once you hear this passage from Herodotus, it really changes the way you think about this entire episode in the Megillah. So I'm going to read. This is from the Histories, Book 1, Section 133. And he's talking about the Persians. And he says, the Persians, are very partial to wine. And he has a few rules about that. Okay. It is their custom to deliberate about the gravest matters when they are drunk. Again, it is their custom to deliberate about the gravest matters when they are drunk. and what they approve in their deliberations is proposed to them the next day when they are sober. And if being sober, they still approve it and they act on it. Sorry, if they are sober, they still approve it, then they act on it, meaning if they agree with the same rule after they're no longer drunk, then they enact that law into place. But if not, then they drop it. And if they have deliberated about a matter when they were sober, they decide upon it when they are drunk. In other words, what Herodotus is saying is that the rules in Persia and the most important matters had to be decided under two states of mind. They had to discuss the issue when they were drunk, and they had to discuss it again later when they were sober. And if they agreed in both situations on what to do, that is when they would decide to change or to do that certain action. Now, why in the world would they have had this ridiculous custom? I mean, first you get drunk and then you discuss it, and then you discuss it when you're not drunk. So what in the world is the background of this absolutely crazy idea? So Tacitus, a different historian who lived about 550 years later, around the time of the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, he explains this rule. And this is what he says. This is again about the Persians. It says, to pass an entire day and night in drinking disgraces no one. Their quarrels, as might be expected with intoxicated people, are seldom fought out with mere abuse, but commonly with wounds and bloodshed. In other words, the fights that they have while drunk are legendary. They don't only yell at each other, but they attack each other, and they sometimes even kill each other. Tacitus continues, yet it is at their feasts that they generally consult on the reconciliation of enemies, on the forming of matrimonial alliances, on the choice of chiefs, finally even on peace and war. For they think that at no time is the mind more open to simplicity of purpose or more warmed to noble aspirations than at the time they're drunk. I mean, that's the best time to discuss these things. Without either natural or acquired cunning, they disclose their hidden thoughts in the freedom of the festivity. In other words, the drunkenness allows them to discuss the matters openly and honestly, and they don't hold anything back. Thus, the sentiments of all having been discovered and laid bare, the discussion is renewed on the following day, and from each occasion its own peculiar advantage is derived. They deliberate when they have no power to hold back the truth, and they resolve when error is impossible. So in other words, this dual system of discussing these issues while they were drunk and when they don't have the inhibition to close and to not discuss these issues, and to hold back and not say what's on their mind, followed by a second discussion when the wine has left them and now they can think more clearly about what they've said, leads to the best possible state of affairs and the best possible rules that they can derive from these discussions. So it's a very interesting idea. And in fact, we see this play out in the Megillah, where Achashverosh now has this incredible question of what to do with his wife Vashti, who has disobeyed and completely embarrassed him in front of everyone. Does he send her away? Does he kill her? Does he let it slide? What should he do? He's drunk. Why does he discuss it now? Precisely because of what Herodotus and Tacitus had told us. This is step one in the deliberations. They have to discuss it first while they're drunk, and will say anything that's on their mind and won't hold back. Now, and this is what I want to focus on as the bulk of the shir today, because one of the strangest customs of Purim that we have is the focus on drinking wine and getting drunk beyond a certain point, which is an activity that is almost universally frowned upon in Jewish thought. And I just wrote down a few examples in my notes over here. So first of all, Noach got drunk when he first stepped out of the Teva and had disastrous consequences. Then Lot got drunk by his two daughters, allowing his two daughters to rape him, and they then became pregnant with his children. According to an opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, both Nadav and Avihu, Kohanim in the Torah, were killed because they entered the Mishkan while drunk and offered an Eish Zara, a foreign, which is the same word as Avodah Zara, by the way. They offered a foreign fire, and that's why Hashem killed them. Another example, a Ben Sora or Moreh is defined as a gluttonous child who gets drunk. That's one of the definitions of the Ben Sora or Moreh. He has to steal his parents' money and to buy alcohol and to get drunk. The entire book of Mishlei has many, many harsh things to say about drunken behavior. According to the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim, part 3, it says it's better to be naked than to be drunk because nakedness is nothing but a social convention. The reason why people think it's wrong is only for social reasons. There's nothing objectively wrong with being naked, according to the Rambam, while he says that being drunk erodes the mind, and therefore it's even worse to be drunk than to walk around naked. And finally, just in terms of logic, of simple understanding of human nature, and even according to facts and figures that we can see now, according to the CDC, over 140,000 Americans die every year due to excessive alcohol consumption. So what's the deal with Purim that we have this halacha, where we have a Gemara in Megillah, Daf Zayin Amud Beis, where Rava has this opinion that a person has to chayav inish live sume. A person has to be intoxicated on Purim until they don't know between Arur Haman and Baruch Mordechai. So what's the deal with this halacha? Now, the very next story in the Gemara I have to point out is the story of Rabba and Rabbi Zera, where they had a Suda together and they got drunk. And Rabba got up and shechted Rabbi Zera. That's the language of the Gemara. Come, Rabba got up, shachtei Rabbi Zera, and he slaughtered Rabbi Zera. He slit his throat. L'machar, the next day, by Rachami B'achai, he davened to Hashem and brought Rabbi Zera back to life. And the next year, Rabba went to Rabbi Zera and said, let's have another Suda again together. But Rabbi Zera responded, we can't rely on miracles at all times, and therefore let's better not to have a Suda together with us. Now, many opinions among the Rishonim, or at least one prominent opinion, Rabbi Ephraim, held that this story, following immediately after the opinion of Rava that one has to get drunk on Purim, disqualifies Rabba's opinion and says that there is no obligation to get drunk on Purim. In fact, one ought not to do that. And furthermore, what people don't realize about this story, even if they've heard of the story itself, is that Rabba was Rava's Rebbe. So Rava has this opinion that we have to get drunk on Purim, and the Gemara immediately follows with a story about Rava's own Rebbe, who then shechted Rabbi Zera in this story. So there's a lot going on here, and there's much more beneath the surface that seems to be going on. And nevertheless, Rambam, who I quoted earlier, is saying that being naked being naked is better than being drunk. The same exact Rambam in Hilchos Megillah, chapter 2, halacha 15, talks about the obligations of the Suda of Purim, and he says, Shosei yayin ad sheyishtaker, a person needs to drink wine until they get drunk, beyera deim b'shichrso. And the best translation of that I can think of is that the person has to pass out from their drunkenness, which is an absolutely wild halacha. It seems to be describing someone getting drunk far beyond normal convention, and in fact to a very, very unsafe place. How Rambam could have said this is a very big pella, a big wonder. But nevertheless, going further now into the Shulchan Aruch quotes down simple halacha: a person has to get drunk on Purim until they don't know the difference between Arur Haman and Baruch Mordechai. However, right over there, the Ramah, in commenting on this Shulchan Aruch, says that a person does not need to get drunk so much, because rather what they should do is they should get drunk a little bit more than what they're used to, and then they should go to sleep. Then they should take a nap. And through the nap that they take, then they won't know the difference between Arur Haman and Baruch Mordechai. And that's the way that a person should conduct themselves on Purim. And ends with a very beautiful line, in my opinion. He says, Echad hamarba ve'echad hamamit, whether you increase or you decrease, meaning whether you drink more or less, whatever you do it for the sake of Shemayim, for the sake of heaven. So not to be too from one way or another, or too anti from one way or another, but to do whatever you do, to do it in a proper way and a good way. And that's the way that a person should behave, and whether they drink more or drink less, that they should be doing it for the right reasons. And that's the way the Ramah understands this halacha. Now, the Mishnah Brura on this, and in his comment on this halacha, says that it's more appropriate for someone to sleep after drinking, meaning to drink a little bit more than they're used to, which is for most people just one glass of wine even would be enough, and then to take a nap. And the Mishnah Berurah says, "V'chein ra'ai lasos." That's the appropriate course of action. That's what a person should do. And I would be remiss if I wouldn't use this platform that I have here in whatever way I could to say that it is absolutely incumbent on all of us to be as safe as we possibly can on Purim, and to drink only the most responsible manner, and not to do underage drinking, and not to drink while we have to drive somewhere. All the safety concerns on top of all of the religious concerns, and so on and so forth. Now, while I'm on this vein, I want to point out one more thing, and that is a absolutely remarkable and and awe-inspiring and quite honestly pretty terrifying tshuva written by a rabbi in the 12th century. Now, this rabbi was named Rabbi Abraham ben Isaac of Narbonne. He was the author of the Sefer HaEshkol, the rabbi of the Rebbe of Zerachi Halevi, who wrote on the Rif famously. And this Rabbeinu Avraham ben Isaac was also known as Ravid, not to be confused with the Ravid who wrote comments on the Rambam. That Ravid was known as Ravid III. The Ravid I'm talking about is Ravid II. Ravid III was his son-in-law and also his student, and that's Rabbi Avraham ben David of Paskier. But here we're talking about Ravid II of Avraham ben Isaac of Narbonne, and he has the following tshuva, which really should shake one to their core if they're paying any attention. And that is that he's asked a question about a man who got so drunk on Purim that he stabbed another man to death. Again, similar story that we have in the Gemara with Rabbah and Rabbi Zera, that Rabbah got so drunk that he slit Rabbi Zera's throat. Here we have a man who got so drunk on Purim that he stabbed another person to death. And given that we don't have the Sanhedrin anymore, he's asked, the Ravid is asked, and we can't give anyone the death penalty, what should be done about this man? What should we do with him? So the Ravid answers as follows. He says, first of all, there are many ignorant people who get way too drunk on Purim because they take the Gemara too seriously and they take it too literally. They think that it means that you actually have to get drunk beyond a certain point. And it's just because they don't know how to learn. They don't understand that it's not meant to be taken as seriously as people make it out to be. And they get this wrong every single year. So first of all, he's very anti the practice of these ignorant people getting way too drunk on Purim. That's another rishon for the team of maybe one shouldn't be getting too drunk on Purim. Now, what should be done about this person? He says a severe penance must be imposed on this man. And this is coming from a time when people would engage in penances all the time. And penances are these kinds of self-afflictions or self-mortifications where they would, having done an Aveira, as a sign of mourning, as a sign of how sad they were, would take on certain tortures on themselves in order to kind of alleviate the sin, or to show how sorry they were, to show how much in tshuva they were. So he describes the penance, the system of penances that this person has to observe. He says three things. First of all, this person who killed this man on Purim, and again, this person was drunk on Purim, so he can't be considered fully responsible. At the end of the day, he did it while he was drunk, and he didn't do it in his full state of mind. So how do we deal with this? So three things. First of all, he has to be flogged twice a day, every morning and every evening, for an entire year. I'll say it again. He has to be flogged twice a day, morning and evening, every single day for an entire year. Second thing, if the person he killed had young children, he's obligated to financially support them. And finally, the third thing, like Eov, in Sefer Eov, he has to shave his head and his beard as a sign of mourning. And when I quoted this to my friends, they all asked me the same question. How is it possible that he could have told him he has to shave his head and his beard when that's explicitly against some mitzvos in the Torah, that you're not allowed to shave certain parts of your head? I have no idea. I don't know how he could have said this. I'm only quoting what he says. But it's remarkable, these three things: to be flogged twice a day for a full year, to support the family of the person he killed, and to shave his entire head and face as a sign of mourning. And the Ravid continues, this Avraham ben Isaac of Narbonne continues, he should be encouraged to mortify himself further beyond these three things. This is only what he's required to do, but he ought to do even more than this, such as by fasting and doing other things than this. And he ends by saying that once he's done these things, then no one should call him a murderer, no one should embarrass him, and definitely no one should embarrass his wife or his children about it. But it really does give you a sense and a scope of the tragedy of what it means for even by accident to kill a single person, that to engage in all these things that this Ravid is encouraging them to do and telling them they must do is remarkable, in my opinion. And it can't help but when I read this for the first time, it absolutely shook me to my core. And thinking about this heading into Purim and how safe we have to be, and thinking about how safe we have to be, especially if we get behind the wheel on Purim or any time we're near alcohol, it really puts things into serious perspective. And this is the kind of tshuva that should be read and studied over and over again. And now you're all aware of it as well. I just want to end this section, which again, I wanted to make the bulk of this year, on the idea of drinking on Purim is that the busiest day of the year at the Maimonides Hospital emergency room in Brooklyn, close to where I grew up, the busiest day of the year at their emergency room is Purim, which is, on top of everything else, a massive Chilul Hashem. There was one year I was speaking to my Rebbe, Rabbi Grossberg, my high school principal, about this, and I asked him if this was a verifiable fact, that the Maimonides ER was most busy on Purim than any other day of the year. And he said, indeed it is, and it can be verified, because there was a campaign that Hatzalah ran one year called Let My Father Enjoy Purim, which the idea was that all the children of the Hatzalah members would say, let my father enjoy Purim. I see that at the Purim Suda, he's constantly getting calls and has to run to people who are sick, to people who've done unsafe things, to people who are in danger. Please let my father be with me and enjoy Purim. And don't force my father to run around to every emergency that's happening because you are not safe enough to drink in a responsible manner. So drinking on Purim, drinking in general, is no joke, has to be discussed and understood, and the halachos given in the proper context. And on top of this, there are certain mitzvos d'oraisa that have to be kept on Purim, such as benching. Benching is a absolute d'oraisa. If one drinks to the point where they won't be able to bench with the proper kavana, then it is absolutely unacceptable. They have to bench with a proper kavana as a matter of it being a d'oraisa obligation, a Torah obligation, and many others. If they're not going to daven with enough kavana and so on and so forth, very, very important topic. But having said what I said, let's move on. So with this background now, Achashverosh is very drunk. He's speaking to his advisors. One of them gets up and says the following: Vayomer Memuchan. Memuchan says the following: Lifnei HaMelech, in front of the king, Vasarim, and all the sorry. This is what he says: Lifnei Vasarim lo ala Melech levado avsa Vashti Amalka. It's not against the king alone who Vashti has committed this atrocity, committed this offense. Ki al kol hasarim v'kol ha'amim, against all of the other advisors, all of the other ministers, all of the people, Asher b'chol medinas hamelech Achashverosh, who live in the entire country, all the countries of the king Achashverosh. Ki yeti dvar hamalka al kol hanashim. When this word goes out to all the other women in the entire country, in the entire empire, they're going to start to have those baalei and benim. Their husbands are going to be despicable in their own eyes. They'll tell them that the king Achashverosh himself said to bring Vashti before me, and she didn't come. So in other words, what happened here with Vashti, Memuchan is telling Achashverosh, will set a precedent for every woman in the entire country. And who knows, God forbid, they may start a feminism movement. It'll be terrible, the most terrible thing. How could it be that you'll allow this Vashti to escape unpunished when it'll have effects in every single domestic relationship in the entire country? That all of the ladies of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen and what she did, there'll be lots of anger, lots of scorn, lots of infighting among the couples in all the houses. So therefore, what should you do? If it so pleases the king, you should give a royal edict, throughout all the law books of Pras and Madai, to not be abrogated, to not be undone. That the Queen Vashti should never appear before Achashverosh again. And the king should give her queenship to someone else who is more worthy than she is. V'nishma piskam hamelech asher yaseh b'chol malchuso. This judgment, this rule will be heard throughout the entire kingship. Ki rabahi, because the kingdom is very great. V'kol hanashim yitnu yikar leba'alehem. And all the women will give honor to their husbands. L'mi gadol v'ad katan, from the big husbands to the big great men to the small men. All the women will treat their husbands with respect. And this is what Memuchan recommends to Achashverosh. Now, again, as we'd seen in Herodotus, this made sense. It was part of the process of creating the new and important rules in the kingdom of Persia, for them first to hear them in a drunken state, or later to hear them in a drunken state, where everybody could say exactly what was on their mind. So what ends up happening? Next pasuk, Vayitav hadavar be'enei hamelech v'asarim. This matter was seen as good in the eyes of the king and the other ministers. Vaya'as hamelech kidvar memuchan. And the king did exactly as Memuchan proposed. While still drunk, the king did exactly what Memuchan said he should do, and doesn't wait until later, when the king has now calmed down and is not drunk anymore and can think about it more rationally. He doesn't wait until that point. In a fit of drunken rage, as we said before, kiso, kaso, koso, the king now decides to do exactly what Memuchan says. The king sends out all the letters to all the countries, and every nation in their own script. To every nation in their own language. Lios kol ish sora bebeso. Every man should be the ruler in their own house. Umedaber kilshon amo, and to speak the language of his people. And this is, again, as I spoke about last time, the book of Esther has many exaggerations and things that it uses for expanded effect. And this seems to be one such example, that the king does this thing very erratically. He's in a drunken rage, and he listens immediately to what ends up being very, very unwise advice by Memuchan, who is probably drunk as well at the same party. And he does this very erratic, irrational thing. And by the way, I also want to point out that nowhere does the Megillah say that he kills Vashti. In fact, all that Memuchan suggested, if we look above, was that the Queen Vashti not appear before the king anymore. Yeah, if you look up, nowhere does it say that Vashti was killed. Only that she would not be appearing before the king anymore, and that's what the king ended up doing. So there's this big question between the Pshat readers and the Midrashic readers of whether Vashti was actually killed, and indeed whether Vashti was a villain. Nothing appears in the book of Esther about Vashti as a villain, but this is some questions between the Pshat and the regular and the Midrashic account. So at this point, I want to pause and stop. I think we'll cut the sheet here because that took quite a bit of time, but I think it was important that we got through this chapter and did it well. So at this point, I want to pause and see if anybody has comments or questions or wants to raise anything. And if not, then this is where we'll pause and continue next time. Okay, so if there are no questions, I appreciate you all for coming. We will continue with the beginning of chapter 2 next week. And thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you very much.